Welcome to another episode of Up2. 9 years ago, Up2 started as a live event series showcasing leaders who are as humble as they are successful. The humility piece is extremely important as we identify leaders who can inspire others. We try to focus our interviews on the non-business aspects of their lives. And in doing so, we have found there's a real thirst to explore their hearts and minds in atypical ways. Our host, as always, is Adam Kaufman. And on this episode, we are featuring a remarkable speech on recovery and redemption from Adam's father, Bill Kaufman. Stick around.
I'm grateful that Calfee, Halter, and Griswold has once again agreed to partner with us. With offices in Ohio and Washington, D.C., this full-service national law firm focuses on all aspects of business and the law, including corporate and finance, intellectual property, and government relations. Let me be clear, I actually approach companies with whom I would like to partner. We just don't accept marketing dollars from anyone. I have been referring my CEO and entrepreneur friends to Calfee for years. I really believe in the firm. One of their notable practice areas is in mergers and acquisitions. And recently, for instance, I introduced a successful entrepreneur in the Midwest to Calfee when he told me that a European-based conglomerate wanted to buy his business. Calfee works with large corporations as well as privately held companies throughout the U.S. and Canada and in Europe and Asia too. So whether it's selling your own business or the more routine needs of creating your first will or anything in between, this firm can really do it all in terms of legal needs. Once again, the firm is Calfee, Halter, and Griswold, and you can find them at calfee.com or on the Up2 Foundation website. Hello, my name is Adam Kaufman, and I've enjoyed hosting the Up2 podcast for the last several years. Recently, my brother and we converted a cassette tape of my father into a digital file just to preserve it. Talking to our awesome producer here at the Up2 podcast, Todd suggested that maybe this would be worth sharing on our Up2 platform. I wasn't sure. Prayed about it, talked to my brother about it, and then I was reminded about one of my most important mentors in my life, former Ambassador Doug Holladay, for years always reminded me that we're all born into somebody else's story, and that it's up to us to determine if that story we're born into shapes us forever, or that we might then create our own story. So a significant part of the story I was born into was that my otherwise loving father was an alcoholic. He struggled with this disease throughout his adult life, and like millions of other Americans, this reality impacted his family, my life, and the lives of everyone else in our family. When I was a senior in high school in Washington, D.C., I was called home one day and told to pack my nice clothes because we were traveling to South Carolina. I understood what that meant, that we were probably going to be attending my father's funeral because unfortunately the decades of drinking were going to be bringing his life to an end. I spent the night in a hospital in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina with him, and miraculously he survived this low point night. And then that set him down this new path of recovery, thank God, truly living life one day at a time, as Alcoholics Anonymous teaches all of us. 24 years ago, he was giving a keynote speech at a large AA convention, and I surprised him flying down to Myrtle Beach to attend it. I sat in the front row. He didn't know I was going to be there, but I'm so glad that I was, because little did we know that less than a year later, he would in fact pass away, having a quick but deadly bout with cancer. I bought a few copies of the cassette tape records that day. Yes, it was a cassette. Yes, that's how long ago it was. And like I said, my brother had the foresight to turn this into a digital file. So even though I shared his speech with dozens of friends and family members over the years, those who were struggling with drinking in their family, we never before released this in a wider audience like on this podcast platform. We will now, I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's meaningful to you. It's part testimonial, part confession, part apology from my dad, but it's also very funny. And if nothing else, it's a glimpse into the story that I was born into. This is Bill Kaufman from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, circa March 2001. And let me know what you think.
I'm an alcoholic. My name is Bill Kaufman. Hi, everybody. My sobriety date is January 13th, 1987. And I'm a member in good standing of the Pomona group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Arvada, Colorado. Arvada is a little suburb placed right between Denver and Boulder, right up against the Rocky Mountains. And I've been telling a few folks this weekend, and I'll tell you, if you've got yourselves a pigeon that doesn't believe in God, you bring him out to Denver, and I'll take him for a ride up into the mountains for a couple hours. And he will become convinced. I do love Alcoholics Anonymous with all my heart. I don't claim to love it any more than anybody else, but I guarantee you nobody else loves it any more than I do. Alcoholics Anonymous saved my life. It gave me another chance. It gave me a way out. And I hope I never forget that. Here tonight with my second and hopefully my last wife, Anita. She goes with me about everywhere I go. Of course, my oldest son's in the audience for the first time. Shocked me to death this afternoon. My brother and his wife are in the audience. And I guess I'm glad they're here. You know, it's an honor and a privilege to be up here and to be here at all with you all this weekend. I'm not giddy happy to be here at the podium. I never am. When somebody asks me to do something in AA, first thing that comes into my mind is no, please, ask somebody else, you know, because I never feel equal to the task. Never have. I don't know if that'll ever change. But my sponsor taught me that it doesn't matter how you feel or what you think. What matters is what you do. So I believe that. The only thing that matters in my sobriety is my actions. And I hope they reflect well on this blessed program. I mentioned my wife, Anita. She's been a special blessing in my life. We get along so well together. We really do. We're married 10 years. And I think the secret to the success of our marriage is that she has managed to divide the duties equally. At our house, she lets me worry about some of the major political, philosophical, and social items like world peace, an end of famine in our time, what to do about that hole in the ozone layer up there. And I ponder these things constantly. And she's in charge of money and sex. She gives me just enough of each of those two commodities to keep me coming back for more. But not too much of either one, lest I might hurt myself or something. We just moved to Denver 2 years ago, 2 years next month, from Myrtle Beach here, where I was born and raised in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm from Pittsburgh originally, Steel Town. Yay, Pittsburgh. Cordell, Cordell, Cordell. Pittsburgh, a shot in a beer town. I was born into a fairly normal family. And I've researched as much as I can. My mother didn't sit me on a potty backwards, and Daddy never beat me, and we were okay. But I remember distinctly never being happy with what I had or where I was right now. I've always wanted to be somewhere else, have something else. I could never wait to be at the next spot. When I was little, I couldn't wait to grow up and be in school. When I finally got into school, I couldn't wait to get into high school. I got into high school as a freshman, sophomore, and so forth, and I couldn't wait to be a senior because they were cool. They had it all together. And then when I got to be a senior, all the girls in the senior class were dating college guys, and I couldn't wait to go to college because the college guys were those cool loafers and stuff, and surely I would grow a little bit more by then, and I'd have it all together, and I'd feel comfortable with myself, and I too would be cool. And then I got to college. I no sooner got to college than I couldn't wait to get out of college, get into the business world, get some money, be cool, be okay with myself, have it all together, feel like I belong, because I never did feel that way. Wasn't anybody's fault. If it was me, I know that now, but I couldn't wait to become an adult. I looked at adults and I thought, man, they got it all together. They don't have all these pressures. They're standing in front of a mirror of a morning for half an hour trying to squeeze a zit. That's pressure. And I wanted to be an adult, man. I wasted so much time because I was never happy where I was. I always had to be somewhere else. And I swear to you, I say this all the time, and I don't know if people believe me or not, I'm still dying to find out what it feels like to be an adult. I don't feel like one. I don't feel equal to the task. I don't feel like I have it all together, you know? I'm 59 years old, and I feel like some little kid up here, you know? About the closest I've ever felt with being comfortable with myself has been in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know? And I can't blame my drinking on anything. Now, I've heard a lot of people talk, and they say, well, I was an alcoholic when I was 3 years old, and this happened, and that happened, and I did this. I was an alcoholic when I took a drink of liquor. And it hit, and the warmth spread, and from that day on, I could never get enough. I may be in the minority, I don't know that, and I'm not trying to criticize anybody, I'm just speaking for me here. I'm also not an ANDA. I'm an alcoholic. And it's been my experience that there are still people coming into alcoholics whose only problem is alcohol. That's why I try to remember our singleness of purpose. It's the common bond, the one common bond. You know, as long as we keep talking about alcoholism and the recovery from same, other people will eventually identify with somebody in the group. But I started drinking. Well, actually what happened was when I was around 14 years old, I discovered two things at about the same time. The fact that liquor made me feel good, and that girls were different from boys. And my life changed that summer, and it's never been the same since. I guarantee. And too much of either one of those commodities has never been enough for me. But especially liquor. Man, I love that liquor. But I went about the process of trying to find the right drink for me. I wanted an adult drink. It was important to me to find just the right adult drink. So I'd go out with my girlfriend, who later became my wife, my first wife, Adam's mother, and we'd go to these cocktail lounges. We weren't of age yet, but up where I come from, as long as you comported yourself in a nice manner, you could get liquor. We'd go out and have mixed drinks and dance and stuff like that at nightclubs. And I tried all manner of drinks. I'd order a white one. And no sooner would the waitress bring that white one, I'd look over here at another table and somebody was drinking a green one. I think that's the one for me. That green looks pretty good, you know? And I'd get a green one, and somebody over here would be drinking a pink one, and blue and yellow and brown and the rainbow, you know? And I discovered that you can get most of the major food groups too if you play your cards right. I tried drinks with celery in them, oranges, lemons, limes, carrots, tomatoes, watermelon. You could have a meal. And they came with door prizes, some of them. You know, fancy swizzle sticks and umbrellas and things you could spin around and play with and make noise and tinkle and bang and boom or whatever. And I liked all that. And I tried a lot of them. I never found one that really suited me until one day I heard a song on the radio. There was a group, boy, am I dating myself. There was a group called the Kingston Trio. And they brought out a song called Scotch and Soda. That's the prettiest song I ever heard in my life. And I mean, it was cool. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to be a Scotch drinker, you know? And I told my friends, I found the perfect drink for me. And they said, what is it? And I said, Scotch. And they said, oh, how does it taste? I said, I don't know. I haven't tried it yet. But that's going to be my drink, see? And then I had older folks warn me about Scotch whiskey. They say, well, you have to develop a taste for Scotch, you know? You won't like it right away, but if you persist, it'll grow on you, kind of like caviar. And I nodded my head like I knew what the heck caviar was, you know. And I don't remember where it was or what I was doing, but I remember how that first drink of Scotch whiskey felt. To this day, I can tell you exactly what it was like. I can describe it in such glowing detail and make you thirsty for one. I have such an easy time remembering the good things and a hard time remembering the bad things. You know? I drank that Scotch whiskey and I was prepared to order 2 or 3 because I knew it would take a while, you know? And I'll tell you how long it took for me to love Scotch whiskey. Bang. It made me feel like I always wanted to feel. It altered my perception of reality, you know? It made me feel taller and better looking and smarter and funnier and more romantic and a better dancer. All those things. I wasn't those things, but it made me feel that way. So I began about a 30-year relationship with whiskey that way. And it was so good to me for a while there. You know? I thought it actually helped me function better. Gave me a keener edge. At least I used to say all that. I don't know if it really did that because, see, it altered my perception of reality. But it made me feel that way. My girlfriend and I eventually got married and settled down and began to raise a family. We had 2 beautiful sons. I got involved in the business world. I began to climb the corporate ladder. And I kept drinking whiskey. And it was good. And I loved it. And I'm not saying I was good in business, but I seemed to be good. I mean, the company I worked for couldn't wait to give me money. They rewarded me tremendously with bonuses and salary increases, and prizes and awards and trips and And we were living the American dream. You know, the family was growing and they were beautiful and smart, and the kids and my wife loved me, and the company loved me, and I kept getting promoted, and I kept drinking that whiskey. And somewhere in there, son of a gun if it didn't turn on me, and I don't know where that happened. You know, I suspect it happened somewhere in there where I began to pay more attention to the whiskey than I paid to my wife and my children and my job and my family and all those things. And it happened slowly. When the book says alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful for us, I identify. I don't know where the change happened, but it happened. And it began to cause problems in my life. Nothing new about that. I know that. You know, see, there's nothing too much new about my story. I'm just a garden variety drunk. Alcohol became increasingly important to me. And as it did, things began to sift through my fingers. You know, and it caused fights at home. And it caused lost sales in business. And lost friendships in the community. Our home life was very, very stressful. I eventually had my wife believing that she was nuts. She thought it had to be her. And I encouraged that line of thinking. Of course it was her. You know? And I loved my kids, but I began to pay less and less attention to them. You know, I wasn't able to spend quality time with them anymore. It happened slowly. Eventually, my wife said, "You need to do something about your drinking." And I went through a lot of different things. You know, I went to a couple of jitter joints and a halfway house and a hospital and a private place up in the hills of Virginia. And I usually got drunk when I got out of those places. But finally, she said, "Why don't you call Alcoholics Anonymous?" And I said, "Okay, get them on the phone for me." Like she was my secretary or something, you know. But she did that. She called Alcoholics Anonymous, and two old geezers came out to talk to me. These two old geezers were about the age I am now. And they hauled me off to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went with them, and they started talking this mumbo jumbo to me about how glad we are to have you with us, and I've got some friends I want you to meet, and all you need to do is sit there. You don't even have to say your name if you don't want to, and we love you and keep coming back. And I'm saying, yeah, right. I was paying lip service. I needed to get my wife off my back. But I went faithfully to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings with these fellows for a couple of months, once a week. Whether I needed it or not that week, I went with them. This was in Canton, Ohio, and the man who took charge of me at that time has passed on now. His name is Martin Krause, and he's a wonderful old guy, and I treated him with contempt. You know, I laughed at him behind his back. I'm sorry for that today, Mark. But you know, if you're still drinking, a meeting a week is a lot of meetings. So I decided to cut them in half. I planned this. I'm a man with a plan, you know. I cut them in half, and I started going every other week, and I just got a little bit better at my lying at home. But my wife wasn't stupid. She said, "You're not going to as many meetings as you used to. What's the deal?" And I said, "Well, darling, they've changed the rules. You only have to go twice a month now." That's the truth. And she bought that. She wanted to believe me. She loved me. She was so hopeful that I would change, but I didn't. But she bought that line I gave her about the AA changing the rules and only having to go on twice a month, right up until the day she joined Al-Anon. Now listen, I didn't know what a resentment was back then. All I know was Al-Anon got on my list. Because shortly after she joined Al-Anon, son of a gun if she didn't throw me out with my suitcase. And it wasn't too long after that, I met her in divorce court where I was alone, unrepresented, and she was there with her Al-Anon sponsor and her Al-Anon attorney, thank you very much. Al-Anon went to the top of my list, replacing my third grade teacher, Miss Butts, who had done something to me. I forget what it was. She was dead for 25 years, but they replaced her at the top of my list. Of course, today I understand and know Al-Anon to be the wonderful, wonderful organization that it is. And thank God for Al-Anon, for what it did to help my wife. Al-Anon enabled my wife to take responsibility for her life and the lives of our children. I wasn't physically abusive, but I'm convinced had I stayed in that household, I would have become abusive eventually. I certainly was mentally and emotionally abusive. And I can stand here today and tell you all that I'm grateful that Al-Anon did that for her and enabled her to separate me from that family. I didn't feel that way then, you know. And it wasn't that I didn't love her, and it wasn't that I didn't love my kids. And it wasn't that I didn't love that job that I lost and the friends that I lost. I loved them. But I had to have that liquor. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't stand life without it. Today I look back and I thank God for that liquor. Because if I hadn't had it, I might have blown my brains out. Because I couldn't stand living. Shortly after that, I moved away and I came to the sunny climes of Myrtle Beach. I thought this would be a good place to die drunk. And I spent the next 6 or 7 years trying to do just that. Convinced that I was going to die hopeless drunk. And it wasn't that I didn't care about that. It's just that I had to have that liquor, see? Had to have that liquor. I wound up living in his hovel. George remembers a little old trailer. The kind of place we like to call home, you know? Puke on the walls. I used to go to the bathroom to puke, and then I just started aiming it in that direction, you know. I didn't have a friend. My family had just about disowned me. Nobody ever came to see me. Yet I was convinced I had to keep my drinking a secret. If I'd hear a car door slam outside, I'd turn all the lights on and bolt the door. Keep the curtains drawn, you know. Rip the phone out of the wall. I began one day to concentrate on our garbage man. I was drinking about a half a gallon of cheap vodka a day by then, scotch having gone by the wayside. And it came in these big, is it a liter and a half or something, these big glass bottles, cheap vodka. And I thought, you know, I've been putting an awful lot of those bottles out in the garbage. Do you reckon that garbage man thinks I'm drinking too much? and surely he'll tell on me. I don't know who he's going to tell. I never got that far in my thinking, but I knew that I had to develop a plan to hide my drinking from the garbage man. Now, when I say I concentrated on the garbage man, I never actually met him. I don't know if I ever even saw him. But he was the drinking police as sure as I'm standing here. Now, Adam will remember this. In this little old trailer I lived in, we had a little laundry room. You couldn't even hardly get in it. It held a washing machine and a dryer. And if you were smart and you worked your plan, you could fill 5 or 6 of these big black plastic garbage bags with glass bottles, empty bottles of vodka. And I could shove them in this laundry room on top of the washer and dryer, and I could get 5 or 6 of them in there. And man, I had that garbage man fooled. But then I couldn't get any more in the darn room there. So I had to come up with another plan. What am I going to do with these empties? So I developed a plan. Here's what I'll do. I'll wait till 3 o'clock in the morning some night, and I will stealthily sneak these garbage cans out to the drunk mobile, and I'll fill the drunk mobile full of these big black empty garbage bags full of empty glass bottles. And I did that. And I snuck out, and you didn't hear the door closed. I did it real quiet like, and didn't turn the headlights on. I don't think the headlights worked, did it? But anyhow, and I drove down behind the old Winn-Dixie it used to be there. It's not there anymore where I lived here in Myrtle Beach. And they had these big old Dempsey dumpsters. And they were big things. And I'd drive real quietly, about 2 miles an hour down to behind the Winn-Dixie, and I'd get out real quiet and I'd look around. I mean, this was a mission, you know. And you think I'm saying I'm not fooling you. I did this more than once. And I'd take 2 of these bags, one in each hand, and I'd sidle over to the dumpster. And when I knew the time was right, I would wheel them up over my head. And when they hit the inside of that dumpster, that glass would break, and you could hear it for blocks around. And I'd empty out the car of all these bags, and I'd wheel them into the dumpster, and this took about an hour. And I'd get back in the car, and I'd drive real slow back home, and I'd get inside the door, and I'd close the door and bolt it behind me, and I'd go, another mission completed. The energy it took to just planning this stuff, but it's exactly what I did. You laugh at all this, you know, and we laugh at all this now. It wasn't funny. This was serious business. This was my major feat of 1985, getting rid of those. You know, I'm serious. Anyhow, one day I began to notice that my body was taking on a new shape, and I had no idea about the ravages of alcoholism. I didn't know anything about that stuff. I went to a doctor, smart fellow that I am, and this was in 1986, and he examined me. He said, "Pal, you know, your liver's hanging out over your belt, and you need to do something about your drinking. You need to quit drinking." And he wrote out 3 prescriptions. He wrote something on 3 prescription pads there, and I took them and I shoved them in my pocket and I paid him and I left. And on the way home, I took one of those prescriptions and I threw it out the car window with contempt. The second one, I stopped at the drugstore and I got filled. I don't know what it was for. I think it was for a diuretic or something. I don't remember. But I got it filled. And while they were filling it, I went next door to the liquor store because he said, if you don't quit drinking, you're going to be dead in a year. And what I heard him say, and maybe you can identify and maybe you can't, what I heard him say was, "You have a year left to drink." So I knew I had to pick up the amount and frequency of my indulgence there. And so I got me some liquor at the liquor store. They were filling this prescription. And the third prescription, I just left it in my pocket. And I drank more than I've ever drank before for about the next 8, 9, 10 months. And finally, one morning, on January 13th, 1987, I woke up off my broken couch, and I reached next to me for this empty jelly glass full of warm, cheap vodka from the night before, and I brought it up to my lips, and I couldn't drink it. I don't know how to explain to you. It was like I was full. I couldn't drink it. I was full physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever. And the thought just paralyzed me. What am I going to do now? You know, if you can't go on with your life drinking and you can't go on with it not drinking, what are you supposed to do? I know that today to be the jumping off point, but I didn't know that then. I was scared. And so I did whatever self-respecting 43-year-old alcoholic does. I called Mama. And she and my stepfather came up to my hovel, and they looked at me, and they looked at the place, and it was a mess, and I was a mess, and they didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do, and it was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I wasn't crying. I was like in suspended animation. I was all bloated and misshapen, and my color was, I don't know, you know what color I look like, dark yellow. And they said, "What are we going to do? What do you think we ought to do?" And I reached into the pockets that I had on. This is like 9 or 10 months later, and this tells you a lot about my laundering habits. I pulled out this prescription that had been in there for months and months, and I looked at it, and it said on there, "Call Willie." And there was a phone number. It was the third prescription that doctor had written for me, and I said, "Well, I don't know, but here, call this number." And they did, and Willie said, "Come on up," because he had a habit of going into the office early every morning and worked at a treatment center. And I went up to see him, and he rushed me over to see the boss at a treatment center who was a doctor. And, you know, there's a large part of my story that if it had a title, it would be called My Doctor, My Teacher, and My Sponsor. My doctor was Jim, my teacher was Willie, and my sponsor was George. And 2 of the 3 are here tonight. And we just talked before the meeting, George and I think Willie's here tonight too. We went to see Willie, and Willie called the doctor and convinced the doctor to take me ahead of some other patients. And I went over to see this doctor, and he performed a rigorous and thorough, complicated exam of me that took about 15 or 20 seconds. And I can hear him now. He's saying, "Pal, pal, you need to get in the hospital or you're going to die." And I think I said something smart to him, like, I'll get back to you on that. He said, "No, I'm serious. I'm talking about today. Or you ain't going to make it." And he talked to me, and he said, "If you don't let me put you in the hospital today, you're going to be a dead man. You're within hours or days of being dead." He said, "If you do let me put you in the hospital, you might die anyhow, but you might not." So kind of cavalierly, I just mentally flipped a coin, and I was in the hospital that day. And while I was in that hospital, the man who became my sponsor came and talked to me. And for the first time, someone came to talk to me and did not talk to me about my drinking. He talked to me about his drinking. And when he was done, he asked me if I believe in God. And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I must have indicated to him that I either didn't or I didn't care. And he said, "Do you believe that I believe?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "That's enough to start." My doctor also told me, Bill, in your case, it is most assuredly going to get worse before it gets better. He had an inkling of what lay ahead for me physically, and I didn't. I went in the hospital, and I spent about that first year, as I recall it, alternating between going in a hospital, and then when I wasn't in a hospital, I'd go to treatment during the day, and I'd go to AA meetings at night with these fellows who would pick me up in a big car and set me in between amongst all of them and play country music. Can everybody hear me? I don't like country music. But I got sober on country music. I stopped loving her today. Oh. They seem to be having a real good time. I wasn't. I went to these meetings not knowing where we were going. It seemed to take forever to get there. Once we got there, I didn't know what the heck all these people were talking about. I had no idea. I was totally confused. You know, I was full of resentment and self-pity and all that other stuff. But mainly, I was confused. I didn't know what was going on. It's like somebody picked me up and landed me on Mars. I didn't know what these folks meant. And you know, it was it was 6 months before I knew that a grapevine was a magazine. I thought it was a bush, and you had to get one of these bushes in order to belong. Because at the end of every meeting we went to, they said, "Don't forget, everybody got your grapevine?" And I'm looking around. And of course, we all know that that's our meeting in print, and it's a wonderful monthly magazine that comes out for alcoholics, and I love it to death. Subscribe to myself. I subscribe to it myself, have for a long time. But then I thought just exactly what I suspected. This is a cult, and you got to buy one of these bushes. They won't even display them, and they won't tell you where they are. And I wasn't going to ask. I don't need anything from you folks. I'm just fine, thank you very much. Don't let these old clothes fool you. You know, I wore a really smart ensemble. It was like a combination. You remember this? I wore a combination sweatsuit and pajamas around for about the first year, and slippers, and the bloodstains kind of blended in nicely with the red stripes on the side of my. But anyhow, so I went to these AA meetings with these old geezers, and they'd sing, and they'd be laughing at the meeting, and then they'd go home, and we'd drive an hour. We went all over to meetings, all over, and they had a heck of a good time. And they'd drop me off, and they'd say, "You know, we love you, and call us if you need us, and we'll see you tomorrow." Thanks a lot for that warning, you know. I was in real bad shape physically, and George talked about it briefly earlier. I had a lot wrong with me from drinking, and I still got a lot wrong with me from drinking. Everything that's wrong with me is all about drinking, you know. But the main thing was I had a lot of hernias, and I had some blood problems and all that stuff. The main thing was my liver was shot, and I guess they really didn't know if I was going to live or die, and I sure looked like I belonged in a box instead of living in that penthouse of mine. But I kept, for some reason, I kept doing what they wanted me to do, and I can't explain that to you. You know, the only thing I know is there must have been some attraction there. You know, there must have been some attraction, especially these people in Alcoholics Anonymous. From Jim and Willie and George on to everyone else I met, they treated me with love and respect and dignity, and I didn't deserve it. I was pretty unlovable. And they gave help and hope to a hopeless and helpless alcoholic. And I fought this thing tooth and nail. In a perverse way, I wanted this not to work for me, so I could show you, see, that it wouldn't work for me. And they kept me under their wing. You know, I remember going into Willie one day and him saying, "Well, Bill, you know, one of the things you might try doing is ask God to help you have a sober day every morning." And I said, "But Willie, I don't believe in God, and I don't want to be a hypocrite." He said, "Kaufman, you've been a liar, cheat, and a thief all your life, and you're worried about being a hypocrite?" He said, "In AA, what I'm asking you to do is called fake it till you make it. That's different from hypocrisy." And I took that on faith, and I began to do that. I went into my doctor one day, and as I recall it, and I don't know if this is really what happened or not, but as I recall it, I went in to yell at him and bawl him out because I was several months sober, and I was feeling worse every day, and I was bleeding, and I hurt all over, and I had so much going on medically, and I didn't have a dime to my name, and I was totally alone, and nothing was working right in my life, and I just kind of let him have it. You know, I whined to him, and he let me go. He just let me get it all out. And when I was done, he said, "Are you all through?" And I said, "Yeah." And then he started laughing like a hyena all of a sudden. He does that. Yeah, those of you who know what I'm talking about. His just big wide grin started laughing. And this is being taped, so I'm going to clean it up just a little bit. And I'm going to say, I asked him, "Just what exactly is so funny, sir?" And he said, "Do you realize that if you had your health and a pocket full of money, you'd be drunk right now?" Oh, man, I ducked my head down and walked sheepishly out the door because I knew he was right. I knew he was right. He had been talking to me about God having me in a harness. And he said, "Bill, if you can look at it that way, God has you in a harness." And my harness was physical. I could not go out and do whatever I wanted to do. It hurt too much. And that was my harness. It held me in place while the healing began. Everybody has their own harness. Might be financial, might be family. Mine was physical. And I began to understand what he was talking about. And I'd go to Willie and I'd say, "Willie, I'm not getting this thing." He said, "Well, what is it, Bill? What aren't you getting?" And I said, "I don't know what it is I'm not getting, but I know I'm not getting it." I didn't know what I was supposed to be getting. And I thought, well, if I don't know what I'm supposed to be getting, how will I know whether I've got it or not? And he said, "You'll know." Thanks a lot, you old goat. He talked in riddles to me. He said, "If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always gotten." All right? And he had me investigate the word humility. I looked at a bunch of books about humility. Some of the greatest books ever written. I have no idea what I read. But when I was done, he said, "You made an effort. The fact that you went and got those books and read that stuff means you might have some humility." This son of a gun got me again. See, I didn't want this to work. And then there was my sponsor. When I wasn't in a hospital or I wasn't too sick to be moved, we'd go to these AA meetings. And you know how your sponsor can be addressing someone way over in the corner of the room, and you know he's talking about you. Or when you have 3 or 4 fellows or women like that around you, and they're all telling you the same things, only in different times and different places, and you're thinking, they're having meetings about me. Jim told me this yesterday. Willie told me last night. Now George is telling me today. These guys, and this was before cell phones. These guys were having meetings, but they weren't. They were all working out of the same material. See? When my sponsor began to walk me through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, we didn't talk a lot about God. Taking the 3rd step with. He snookered me. He's still doing it to people. Somebody should stop this fella. Before he gets long-term sobriety. He had me write down a 4-step, and he explained it to me. And, you know, I'd been in treatment, and I had a stack this high of papers and pamphlets and charts and stuff about how to do a 4-step. We did it out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We did it out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thank God for that. And he showed me how to do it. And I began to make my resentment list. And he asked me if I had many resentments. And I said, well, not that I can think of offhand. You know, I might have 1 or 2. And before I was done, everybody I ever met was on that darn list. Some of it was so petty and embarrassing. That poor 3rd grade teacher, I have no idea what she did to me. May she rest in peace. Dead 30 years, and she was still number 2 on my list, right after Al-Anon. When I finally got done with this 4th step, and wouldn't you know it, he didn't used to travel very much in his business, but when I got done with the 4th step and I was ready for the 5th, and you know how you want to get that 5th done when you're finally finished writing it? You know, it's just because it's just a big yoke around your neck. And he went out of town for a week, and I thought, oh my God. You know, I'm either going to die or fall down and take drunk, or something's going to happen before he gets back. And I was a wreck for a week till he got back. And he got back, and I read my 5th step to him. And my purpose here is not to take you all the way through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, but there are a couple of key points. You know, he shared with me about him. He shared with me about him. Because there were some things that I did not write down there, and I didn't know until the very end whether I was going to tell him these things or not. But in the end, I did. You know, and when I was done, he didn't shrink back in horror. You know, I've got this really mean streak. I call it satire, but some people call it mean. Someday, I just like to, when a pigeon gives me his 5th step, I would just like to sit there and suddenly pop my eyes open and say, you did what? Oh my God, get out of this house. But, you know, I kind of agree with Marie over there. The hard part about a 5th step isn't giving it, it's listening to it, because you got to stay awake and act like you're interested. And I've learned that they're all pretty much the same, and we're all the same kind of people, and you know. Just one time I'd like to do that, but I won't, I don't think. One day at a time. Well, I'll tell you something, what happened as a result of working these 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous together. Somewhere in there I changed. And I really wish I could point to the day where that happened. It just didn't happen like that. It happened slowly, you know. And I didn't read the second appendix to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous till I'd been in the program for several months. And when I read that, man, I said, gee, that's me, you know. I believe that some people have an overwhelming experience, a kind of an emotional thing that enables them to see the light, and like Bill did, and change immediately on the spot. It just didn't happen for me that way, and I know others that it hasn't happened to. My change has been of the educational variety, and it's been slow and difficult and painful, but I have changed. I believe in God. You call it whatever you want. The moment I try to give shape or form to God, I begin to lose its essence. I just believe that God's there. And to the point where every morning when I get up now these days, I ask God to help me have a sober day. I've been doing that for a long time, and it used to mean one thing. It used to mean, don't let me take a drink. Today it means something else. It means don't let me take a drink, but it also means help me act in a sober fashion that day. Help me to reflect well upon Alcoholics Anonymous. That's all. You know, I don't want to do big things in AA. I just don't want to hurt it. I just don't want to hurt it. I don't want to tarnish Alcoholics Anonymous. But anyhow, I was supposed to get this liver while we were doing all this stuff, you know, and I got a beeper and all that, and there came a point where I was too sick for the surgery. I wound up going in the hospital at one point. I was a year sober. Actually 14 months sober, and woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning one night, and I felt something wet in the bed, and I thought, man, I thought this would stop after I quit drinking, you know. I had been growing this watermelon out in the middle of my belly, full of ascites fluid from liver disease, you know, and it got so big that what had happened, it burst, and my abdomen exploded that night. And as I recall, I lost about 35 pounds in a rather short time. I needed to lose a little weight. I don't think you're supposed to lose it like that. They rushed me. I called Alcoholics Anonymous, and those folks ran me to the hospital. And that began, as I recall, something like a 45-day period of the most intense pain I've ever experienced in my life. My abdomen exploded, and all this fluid came out. It shot out of me like out of a little garden hose. I could spray it around the room, you know. It didn't hurt at the time. It just looked funny. And we went in the hospital, and they started trying to work on me. And it was when I was 14 months sober that I became too sick for the surgery, even if they harvested a liver that matched me. And I couldn't have painkillers. Most of you probably know that you can't give a liver patient painkillers. And so it was kind of white knuckle time through that whole experience, about a month and a half as I recall it. And every day was more painful than the day before, and the pain never let up for an instant, and it got worse. And I would go in and out of consciousness, and I would scream to God, you know, please, just give me a minute here, you know. And they did all kinds of things for me in the hospital there. My doctor assembled a team, and they worked on me in all kinds of ways, and they couldn't get the hole closed there. And finally, one doctor put together a process whereby they could keep these wet bandages on me to give it some chance to try to begin to heal. But it was very, very, very painful. And many of you who are here tonight came to visit me in the hospital. The nurses used to come in the middle of the night and ask me, you know, who are you? Because you got all these people coming 24 hours a day. They thought like I was the governor's nephew or something, you know. And I would share with them who I was and why I was there. And more of them began to come in. Nurses would come in the middle of the night, and they'd ask me questions like, Bill, do you have any idea why I've married 4 alcoholics in a row? And these AAers wouldn't leave me alone. They kept visiting. And my mother stayed with me. The whole time I was there, they put up a little cot for her in my room. And the pain was unbearable. And for a long period of time, I was laying on this inclined plane with my feet up in the air and a tent over me and all these tubes. I don't remember how many tubes were going in me, you know. And I met my ex-wife's new husband kind of hanging upside down. Hey, how you doing? She's a fine woman. Take good care of her. Pain was terrible. It was awful. I also learned what a dry shampoo was then. I never knew what a dry shampoo was. My mother, though, concentrated on my hair while I was in the hospital. And she bought some stuff and she shook at my head and was giving me a dry shampoo. And she became alarmed and said, oh my goodness, Bill, look. And she brought her hand around and my hair was beginning to fall out. And she had a handful of my hair. And I like my hair, you know. I don't have much of anything else, but I have a decent head of hair. And I started laughing and she became alarmed and she said, Bill, settle down. What are you laughing about? And I yelled at God. I said, okay, God, all this, and now you're going to make me die bald. Finally came a day when my doctor and a couple other doctors came in and talked to me and said, Bill, this is it, and there's nothing more we can do, and you're not going to make it. And you better say goodbye to those people that are important to you. And my ex-wife was there, and she had my 2 sons there, and my oldest son, who's here tonight, will never know how much he means to me for staying with me all night that night. And he talked to me, and I remember very little of what happened because I was kind of delirious. It was so painful. And I remember him saying, Dad, don't die now. Can you make it for 5 minutes? And then that 5 minutes would go, and he'd say, can you make it 5 more minutes? And he'd wipe my forehead off. And I didn't die that night. I was supposed to, and I didn't. I remember at one point in there, my sponsor was in the room with me, and I was crying, and I was screaming to God, please, will you give me just 5 minutes without pain? And as I recall it, George said, Bill, he had tears in his eyes, and he said, Bill, you're still praying the wrong prayer. Instead of asking God to take away the pain, how about we ask God to be with us through this pain to whatever lies on the other side? And I knew exactly what he meant. And I became as accepting and willing at that moment in my life as I've ever been before or since. I knew if I died, it could be okay. I knew if I died, I'd done the best I could. I'm no big hero. You know, I didn't want to die. I'm not stupid. I wanted to live. Because magically, I had begun to understand the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. While I was sick in the hospital, they would bring these newcomers in. And they'd say, Bill, we want you. Sometimes the doctor would send him in. Sometimes Willie would. Sometimes George would. And they'd say, we want you to talk to this new guy. And I'd say, what do you want me to tell them? If they work real hard, they can get to be just like me? There's old bald-headed Bill dying in a hospital, telling them how great life is in Alcoholics Anonymous. But they brought him in and I did it, and one of them was my brother. He came down to say goodbye to me, and he was a bad alcoholic. And I talked to him about my drinking. By the grace of God, he's been sober 14 years in Blessed Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous as of about 3 days ago. I scared him sober. But I didn't die that night. I did not die that night. And I'm so grateful because it has given me a chance to even further and more fully understand the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and how this thing can work in a person's life. A person like me is a hopeless and helpless alcoholic. You know, and I know we give our program, the 12 steps, freely to other groups as long as there's no profit motive. Anybody who wants to applies. Alcoholics Anonymous lets them use the 12 steps. But correct me if I'm wrong, Jay and George, I don't think we guarantee anybody that they'll work. What we know is they work for alcoholics. We know that. I know that. And that's why I love this blessed program, you know. Well, I didn't die that night, and slowly I wish I could tell you the pain went away right away. That'd make a good story. But it didn't. It took a while. But eventually I got better, and I went from being too sick to get a liver to being too well to need one. And I baffled the doctors. The only people that understood it were the people from Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I'm not unique. They'd seen others like me. And I've seen more like me since then. And nothing unique about any of us. And I eventually got out of the hospital. And I got a new chance at life. And I cleaned up my act a little bit. I had to go out and make amends. And I remember making amends to my two sons' mother. She was still pretty angry at me. She had every right to be. But I made amends over a sandwich one night, and she understood. She'd been in Al-Anon. But her reply to me when I was done was, "That's real good for you, Bill, and I'm real happy you're getting sober. But a fat lot of good that does me." Those are the amends that are hard to make. You know, the first person on my amends list was my mother. And I thought I would have a terrible time making amends to my sweet mother. And I planned it, and I wrote it out, and I screwed up the courage, and I told my sponsor that I was ready, and it was like putting on armor, you know, and getting ready for battle because I'd hurt that woman so much. And I went and I made amends to my mother, and when she was done, she hugged me and told me how much she loved me. Here's a woman who loves Alcoholics Anonymous, my mother. When I was done, I went home and I called my sponsor and I said, "Well, I did it, George. I made amends to my mother." I was so relieved. And his response was, "Well, it's always good to get those easy ones out of the way up front." He knew my mother. You know, he knew my mother, and he knew how wonderful she was and how much she loved me. And I could have spoke Russian to her, and she'd say, "God bless you and God bless Alcoholics Anonymous." She wouldn't care. The tough ones were the people that didn't think highly of me. My ex-wife. Today we're friends. Today my ex-wife and I are friends. And the last couple of years we lived here in Myrtle Beach, my second wife and I, my ex-wife moved down to Wilmington, and they used to go shopping together. My two wives. What's wrong with this picture? I kept a suitcase packed just in case, you know. Probably most importantly, over a period of years, Alcoholics Anonymous has enabled me to become reunited with my sons. They lived through all this. They were damaged by all this. Hopefully not beyond repair. They know about Alcoholics Anonymous. They're grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous. They know the three men that I speak of so highly. Jim and Willie and George. There were others too. So many. I won't start naming them. You know what it's like. Now you take Willie, it wasn't anything special about him. Ugly little guy from Charleston. Used to smoke 2 cigarettes at a time and play with his hair. Man, that guy was odd. But he loved me, and he moved back to Charleston from Myrtle Beach about 4 years into my sobriety. And when he did, I walked into his office one day right before he left, not knowing that we'd continue to be friends and visit back and forth. I went back to him and I said, Willie, there's nothing I can do to repay you for what you've done for me. You know, I was crying. And I said, if I had money, there isn't enough. And I told him I loved him. And he cried too. And he came out from behind his desk and he hugged me. And he's crying. He said, Bill, pass it on. And I hope to do that, folks. I hope that as long as God gives me air to breathe, that in some small way, I can continue to pass on the message of recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous to other alcoholics. There came a time when we decided to move out to Colorado, and it was a major move for us, man. You're leaving your home group in AA and leaving your roots, and my wife had so many friends here, and just all that stuff. It was a big move. I mean, we didn't just decide overnight to do this. We moved out to Colorado, and folks, we love it there. It's awesome. It's beautiful. The weather agrees with my health, and it's just great. And the only anchor I had in my life during that time of moving out to Colorado was Alcoholics Anonymous. I figured they had AA out there, and so I started going to meetings the first day we were out there. And I didn't know who I was going to get for a sponsor, and I didn't know where I was going to have my home group. But I went to a little meeting one night, right about 2 or 3 miles from my house, the Pomona group. And there was a young lady in there, and unknowingly, and a well-meaning young lady, had a lot of problems, and she was crying. She said, I need to talk to you about my drug problem. And this little old runt that reminded me so much of Willie spoke up in a quiet voice and said, Miss, I remember you. You were here about 6 months ago, and you tried to talk about drugs then. And I want to tell you, we don't do that here. He was very nice to her, and he told her where to go to get help. Gave her the address of a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And he said, we stick with alcohol here because I've seen groups die once they abandon their singleness of purpose. And I don't want this group to die because it's my home group, and it has been my home group for 31 years. And I knew right then that was my home group, and he was my sponsor. Because as much as I love the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, I love the 12 traditions. You know, you never just break one tradition. You break 2 or 3 at a time, and you ding 2 or 3 other ones all at one time, you know. And people like to say, well, we're autonomous, we can do. They always like to use that tradition as an excuse for breaking other ones, you know. I have a voice and I have a vote, and that's all. And I think I went out to Colorado with the right attitude. I went there just to fit into Alcoholics Anonymous, not to make any big changes. I think I fit in okay. I go to several meetings a week, and son of a gun if they didn't elect me GSR. And so I'm GSR, I'm a home group out there. And I love service in Alcoholics Anonymous. I love the unity of belonging to a home group, and I love the recovery program that's the 12 steps of AA. You know, I'm pretty happy guy. You know, I was never happy with where I was right now. I always had to be somewhere else, be somebody else. I'm happy with who I am right now. You know? I don't know if you know this enough. You people mean everything to me. You just mean everything to me. I go to an occasional bad meeting, and I'm like that guy. You know, you hear people say, I've never been to a meeting I didn't like. And they just haven't been to enough meetings yet. I've been to a lot of meetings I don't like, you know. But the important thing is that I keep attending Alcoholics Anonymous. I keep asking God to help me have a sober day in the morning. I talk to another recovering alcoholic every single day of my life if I possibly can. I go to 4 or 5 meetings a week, and at night when I slide in between the sheets, I take a mental inventory, and I thank God for another sober day. It doesn't take long. It's not a big heroic effort. And what rewards I reaped from that, you know. I've got a wonderful marriage. I enjoy a two-way love relationship with my sons today. My mother lives with us out in Colorado, and she likes it out there. You know, what more do you want? You know, the daily reflections today talked about don't be discouraged. You know, and they talked about not setting your sights too high. You know, my sponsor promised me one thing. When he began to talk to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, he promised me one thing. He said that if you go through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous with me and you learn to apply these spiritual principles to your life, I guarantee you one thing and one thing only. You can become reasonably happy most of the time, period. Won't be giddy happy all the time. Good things will happen, bad things will happen, but I guarantee you, you'll become reasonably happy most of the time. And that's happened for me. If it hadn't, look, I'm very results oriented. If I didn't enjoy this, I'm out of here. You know, you think I can't find anything better to do tonight? You're right, I can't. But I do love Alcoholics Anonymous. I owe it everything. And I love you people for being here. I want to thank the committee for giving me the privilege of sharing my experience, strength, and hope with you. I hope you have a nice time at the rest of the convention. I want to leave you with one thing, okay? Willie died, and died of cancer, and I was privileged to be at his funeral and help with that a little bit. And when he died, he left me 2 things. A little book called The AA Way of Life, and a little ashtray. And on this little ashtray is scrawled a poem. And the poem goes, there's the love of a man for a maid, and there's the love of a child for its mother. But the greatest love of all is the love of one drunk for another. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Up2 podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe via your podcast platform of choice. To receive our newsletter, suggest speakers, and give your candid feedback, please email Adam directly at adam@up2foundation.org. We would love to hear from you. The Up2 podcast is produced by BLC Digital Strategies, a full content creator company located right outside of the nation's capital in Tysons, Virginia. See you next time.